So what do you do at Seven Ponds?
I work with the herb group. I used to call us herb ladies, but we do have one guy, so I have to say herb group. We tend the herb garden, which has 4 quadrants: the fragrant, dye, medicinal, and culinary.
Oh.
So we keep that groomed and healthy and beautiful. And that's where I met lavender.
Oh.
Thanks for the great segue.
Yes. So now the lavender farm, that's a story you want to tell me how you got involved in that with your husband?
Sure. No, not with my husband.
Right.
The reluctant farmer.
Yes.
Well, it all started when I wrote my first piece of fiction for the Mantle. It wasn't the Mantle then. It was a story about Prince Rabam, who had difficulty facing the fact that he was going to be king someday, and a few other conflicts. That was my first piece of fiction I ever wrote when I went back to school as an older person in '94. Well, at the time, my firstborn daughter was complicating her life and our life with drugs. And she died in 1966 of a toxic reaction to alcohol and cocaine. And of course, that devastated me. So I needed places where I could give and serve and heal. So between researching herbs for the Mantle, because the tribe in the story is self-sufficient. They don't have doctors, they don't have hospitals. They treat themselves for their illnesses, and if they die, they die. That's the way it goes. So I found Seven Ponds Nature Center and worked in the herb garden, and that's where I found lavender. Being a gardener, I couldn't believe that I had never been given a sprig of lavender or whatever. But that's because lavender is a Mediterranean plant and it doesn't grow well in Michigan. But I didn't know that then. So I go to work with these wonderful ladies, and Seven Ponds ends up being a refuge for me, a home away from home. And these ladies were wonderful, and they taught me. This plant smelled so delicious, so wonderful, like you could eat it. And sure enough, you can. So I asked Jan Burns, the co-chair at the time of the group, what is this plant? She says, well, Iris, that's lavender. What planet did you come from, Iris? So I promptly planted some in my perennial island in the front yard and started cutting it and giving sprigs, little tussy-mussies, to my friends when they invite us for dinner or hospital, when I visited people in hospitals. And they loved it. And I realized it was also healing me of grief and migraine headaches. So that's how I got the vision for the farm, the lavender farm, which was my husband's nightmare. So we went out west to the Squim Dungeness Valley to their lavender festival. I went for business, my husband went for pleasure. And I saw the model that they used, the farmers they used, learned a little bit about growing lavender. And I was 55 at the time, and I was silly enough to think I could pull it off, and I did, with a lot of help from women. That's a great thing about women. They support their women folk. So that's how it worked. While my husband hid in the basement, I grew the farm. So.
How big is the farm?
Well, at one point we had had an acre of lavender. We have 3.3 acres, and it's beautiful rolling property, which is perfect for lavender. Good drainage, lots of sun, full sun, and so at one point we had an acre, a few thousand plants, more than enough for our visitors, because the whole vision was to have people come and harvest, touch the lavender, particularly women. They're the usually the children caregivers, you know, the homemakers. And so I wanted mothers who had lost a child to find some solace. And they did. And I did have some fathers who lost children come as well. So it was an instructional farm. A lot of workshops on sustainability.
Very good.
That's how I learned to be a beekeeper, and we have a solar panel, a solar tracker in our backyard. So all I need is to grow my hair like you and I'll be a hippie.
So then all that effort turned into the mantle.
Plus. See, as I said, the story of Prince Robin came first in 1994. That's the seed. And when I had the call, because it was a call, it truly was a vision, the prairie had transformed into ribbons and ribbons of lavender. And I balked at first because I knew my ancestors were subsistence farmers in Kentucky, so I knew what I had ahead of me. I knew the hard work, the labor. And then to serve the public is another deal, because I knew not everybody would get the fact that I was serving them for their healing. You know, not everybody got that. Some people came and were very demanding. So I wanted to push them down the hill, but I didn't. I was patient.
I understand, yes.
As I said, lots of support. So during that 10 years operating the farm, during the winter I would work a little bit on the mantle, just to keep in the story. And year by year, the characters fleshed out. You know, I became acquainted with them. So by the time I closed the farm in 2014, I dove back into the novel. That was all I did for a few years. Finished it, went back to Ireland. I spent 2 writers' retreats in Ireland because that's where my ancestors are, and my characters are Celtic in ancestry. That was not by plan, that was just by my life. They came out of my life, out of my heritage. The Queen Hashti bears a lot of the characteristics of my granny. She was a German, of Scot-German ancestry. My mom, my grandfather, he was a McCoy. That's the good side of the feud. So I didn't divide, I didn't manipulate it. The characters told me who they were, what their purposes were, what their aim was. They told me their secrets, the great prophecy that led them to recovering a wonderful, wonderful thing they had lost. And I can't tell you what it is, because that would spoil the book. That would spoil your process. How far have you gotten, by the way, in the story?
To a couple chapters.
Couple chapters.
Yes.
So what do you think?
Very nice, very excellent, yes.
Good, good.
Yes.
I don't mean to interview you, Jim.
That's okay.
But I do that at times.
Yes. Yes, it's very interesting. I enjoy reading about the tribe and what they go through. And
It gets better. I've been told that the beginning is really tough, that people need a character list and a family tree, that would really help.
yeah, because it jumps quite
Right.
rapidly.
So I'm working on that, and should have that today, because tomorrow night I give a book talk at the Addison Township Library. My artist is going to accompany me.
Oh, nice.
So she did all the beautiful art in the book, Joyce
dates where you're going to be signing books coming up?
Yes, yes. Do you want me to tell you that?
Yes, that'd be fine.
Okay. Tuesday night is at Addison Township. That's on Rochester Road, where Rochester Road and Lakeville intersect. That's at 7. And then Saturday night, I'm going to be back to my home away from home, Seven Ponds Nature Center. And Joyce and I will be, because she'll be talking as well. I'll introduce the subject and talk about the book, and then Joyce will talk about the creative process of illustrating the book. My husband and I met Joyce when we painted pastels under the mastermind of August Gloss, the Starkweather Alley Gallery in Romeo. And that was just a few years after Becky died. So my husband and I did that together every Friday night, so we would have something to connect us, rather than him coming home exhausted from work, me being exhausted, and just not even looking at each other. We stood side by side and we painted and listened to August Gloss play Frank Sinatra's music, and that's where I saw how skillful Joyce was in assimilating the spirit of landscape and object onto the easel. So I knew she was the person. I'm not a very good painter. So, but I trudged my way through it. But when August died, that disbanded our group. And lo and behold, Joyce appeared in Detroit Working Writers 3 or 4 years ago. And that rekindled us, that reunited us. So when I finished my book in 2016, I knew she was the author, or she was the illustrator for my book. I had in mind those beautiful, excuse me, those beautiful illuminated painted windows in the Detroit Public Library. I'm a docent there. I learned a little bit about the art and the architecture, and these beautiful painted windows was what I had in mind.
Oh,
And Joyce did a pretty good job at that.
excellent. Well, any other projects after this coming up?
I have a memoir cookbook in the making. Of course, a lot of biscuits and gravy and pinto beans and
Yeah, you've written for Edible Wow, haven't you?
yes.
Yes, that's an interesting magazine.
Yes. Yeah, I haven't written for them in a long time,
No.
but we'll see.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, peace out.
Peace out.
Welcome back. Now I'm speaking with Gary Allison, author and cable coordinator and fascinating person.
A fascinating person. That's one way to put it.
So can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and where you went to school?
Yeah, I grew up all over, really. I was born in Michigan, but it was 70s and 80s. Economy wasn't too good in Michigan, so my family moved around quite a bit. So I lived in Virginia, West Texas, and then ultimately Florida. But then I moved back here after my parents divorced when I was in high school and finished high school here. I went to Clarkston and then finished my senior year at Pontiac Central. So that's, I'm a hodgepodge. Yeah.
And so now you're married and...
I am. I married a Waterford girl, so that's why I'm in Waterford. We met at a birthday party, and then after that, after high school, I went into the service, and when that was done, we went to Florida, and then ultimately found our way back here near her family. I have some family around here too, but her immediate family is here in Waterford, so we just put roots here.
And when you were in the military, you were a cryptologist.
Yeah, that is something I can neither confirm nor deny.
Okay.
No. Yeah, in the Navy, worked in naval intelligence, a cryptologist. So it's a fancy word for a guy who listens in on people and decodes things. That's it. So it was exciting. It was fun. It was during the end of the Soviet reign. So we got
Cold
to
War.
see the end of the Cold War, and it was interesting.
So you ended up in on a ship, and also you ended up in Alaska, huh?
No, I joined the Navy, and I didn't even know the Navy had ships until I got out, because I never saw one. I thought it was just a rumor. I was on an Army base, I was on an Air Force base, I ended up on a naval base, but it wasn't a port. The only ships that ported there were Coast Guard cutters in Alaska. So it used to be a former sub base for the Navy, but they no longer used it. It was just a listening post out on the Aleutian Islands. The Russians had a Soviet sub base on the Kamchatka Peninsula, which wasn't too far from where we were. So that's what we did. We'd try to find their submarines from there. But it was the end of the Cold War, so there wasn't a lot going on at that point. And that was during the Clinton administration. And they were closing down military bases, and one of them was the base that I was on. And so we were really wrapping up activities there and turn out the light. I actually turned out the lights on the post before I left. So we closed the base down. Had been there since World War II. In fact, my grandfather was stationed there post World War II.
Wow.
So, and I did not know that until I got out years later. And we were sitting there talking about where I've been and where I was stationed, and I mentioned where I was in Alaska, and he said, "Oh yeah, I was there." And I said, "Yeah, we probably had the same buildings that you stayed in. It was a horrible base. It needed to be closed down, but it was interesting." He did the same thing I did, only he did it for the Army.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then you got out and you became into screenwriting, or?
I got out and became a vagabond. I got out and went to school. I had no idea what I wanted to do, nothing at all. So I was going to school and fell into writing. I really enjoyed it. It never dawned on me that writing was something that people did for a living. It still doesn't really. And into film, and I just started tooling around with that, and I picked up a lot of work in working in film. Did a lot of documentary film, making a lot of television, and did that for years until probably about 2004, 2005. I decided to go back to what brought me to that love of film, which was screenwriting, and so I started doing that on a full-time basis. But I didn't sell my first screenplay until 2008. At that point, I had been working in film and television for 11 years. I've written commercials and stuff, but I never sold anything in regards to film. But in 2008, I sold a horror screenplay that was made into a very bad movie. But that really got my start, and did a couple of children's shows, direct-to-video type stuff. It used to be, you go to the store and you'd see like, children's DVDs and things like that, and this stuff that isn't necessarily on television, but they're little DVDs.
Oh, yeah.
That's the kind of stuff I did for a while, and worked in the sound effects business, and then in 2011. I was on a producing contract. It ended after 5 years, and I decided I didn't want anything to do with producing anymore, and started writing full time, and optioned a few more scripts, and wrote 2 books, and that's kind of what I've been doing.
And the first
now.
book was There Is a Season?
There Is a Season was the first book, and it's out of print now.
But it's not a whole book, it's a novella.
A novella, yeah, which is longer than a short story and shorter than a novel.
And it's called a novella.
And it's called a novella. And I wrote that book, geez, I don't even know when I wrote that, to be honest with you. It had to be 2012, 2011. Right after my contract ended, and it was inspired. A friend of mine had cancer, and for those at home watching, it's not a happy book. It's a book about a man who had lost his wife to cancer and now is dealing with his daughter having cancer, his young daughter. And it's sort of inspirational, but you know, it's a tearjerker. And so that was out there for a while. And then one day I decided I was going to adapt it into a screenplay. And I did that, and I sold the screenplay last year. And they shot the movie this year. It'll be out in 2019 under a different title. It's called Faith Under Fire. But that'll be coming out next year. It stars Dean Cain and Superman fame, and Kevin Sorbo of Hercules fame.
Oh yeah, I like Kevin.
So I have Superman and Hercules in my film adaptation of my novella coming out.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And then you wrote about the final round, which is fascinating. This true story of a boxer.
Yeah, it's a story about Billy Miskey. Billy Miskey was a heavyweight contender in the 1920s. He was the first guy to fight Dempsey for the heavyweight champion. Dempsey defended his title against Miskey in 1920 in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And it was the first radio broadcast replay of a fight nationwide. WJR did it. It was Radio Detroit then. And Miskey was probably the best fighter you've never heard of. He was friends with Dempsey. He had never been knocked out, never been knocked down. He was a great, heavy-hitting fighter. But he had a secret that nobody knew, not even his family. The only people that knew were his manager and a writer friend of his that wrote for the St. Paul newspaper. He was from St. Paul, Minnesota. And that was that he had Bright's disease, which is a kidney disease. It was fatal then. And he was dying. He was told he had to quit fighting. And if he quit fighting, he had about 5 years to live. And he was diagnosed with Bright's disease about 1918. So 1920, he fought for the heavyweight championship. And he was right in the middle of that disease. He had not stopped fighting. And he just needed to make enough money to keep his family afloat, because he had also opened up a car dealership. And he wasn't selling Fords. He wasn't selling Cadillacs or anything like that. He was selling a car that was made by a watch company. And the watch company just couldn't keep up with the demands of maintenance and sales and all that kind of stuff. So it was going under, and he was going bankrupt. He lost that fight to Dempsey, and the first time he was ever knocked out in the 4th round. And in fact, the knockout was so brutal that Dempsey thought he had killed him. And Dempsey actually picked up Billy and carried him to the corner and tried to bring him back. And of course he came back from it, and he continued to fight after that. And then in 1923, he was flat broke. He had a family, 3 kids, living in a much smaller house than they were, nearly bankrupt. And he was on his last leg. And he went to his manager and asked him to get him one more fight for a large purse. And it was around Christmas time, 1923. And of course, his manager said, you can't, nobody will give you a fight. Everybody knows there's something wrong with you. They might not know what's wrong with you, but they definitely know there is something wrong with you. And Billy insisted, and he set up the fight with a brutal fighter from New York. And Billy couldn't even train. He was so sick he couldn't even train. All he ate was boiled fish and drank coffee. He laid in bed all the way up to the fight. And when he showed up for the fight, he was noticeably thinner, obviously sick, and was taking quite a beating. But then in the 4th round, he knocked out his opponent and won the fight, and won a large purse to give his family one last Christmas that they would remember, and bought his wife a baby grand piano. They had a wonderful Christmas. He was able to pay off his debts and just kind of set the family on its way so that when he's gone, they'll be okay. And on the day after Christmas, he collapsed and went into the hospital, and then he died 2 weeks later at the age of 27.
Wow.
So you know, it's quite an inspirational story. It came about actually because a director friend of mine, Chuck Grady, we had met a few times at some premieres, and we were always laughing we should work together. And eventually we decided to work on a project together, and he's the one that pointed me towards Billy Miskey, and I read up on him, I called him up, said this is a movie. So it started out as a screenplay. And in the process of trying to get that made, it's when I decided to write the book. And so I wrote the book after the screenplay, and usually it doesn't happen that way, it happens the other way around. The screenplay has gone through many different forms, many different versions. The one that it's out there they're trying to make now is a little different than the book. This is the original story based on that idea. Of course, for movie purposes, we dramatized a lot of things and everything. So,
Right.
So it's a little different, but it's still, the core of the story is still there about this man.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then you also have gone to do this, a new short story,
Yeah.
short movie.
Spider and the Fly.
And that, you started with, I've been telling people about GoFundMe.
Yeah, this is interesting. Over the every year I do a reevaluation of what I'm doing with my life, basically. Now, I never wanted to direct. I was tired of producing, but I was evaluating the reasons why behind that. And the reason why I never wanted to direct is because I didn't know if I was any good at it. So, and I decided that wasn't a good enough reason. So I need to go ahead and do it. I know how it's done. I don't know how good I'll be at it, but the only way to figure that out is to actually do it. And so I wrote this script, The Spider and the Fly, and then obviously I needed to raise funds to do it. And we figured that it would cost about $5,000 on the low end to make this movie. I was dumping $2,000 of my own money into it, and it was actually at the suggestion of my son. He said, "Well, why don't you just start a GoFundMe?" GoFundMe. I mean, who does GoFundMe? You know, who's going to give me money for a short film? And because it's panhandling, but I wasn't going to use that as an excuse. So I started a GoFundMe page, and within 3 days we raised the budget. Thanks to a lot of generous people, which just floored me. A lot of support from people here and around the country that like the vision and like the idea of supporting the arts and supporting specifically this
It
project.
was really easy to do, too.
Well, yeah, that's
you
the
just clicked
surprising
on the
thing.
Facebook and you just
Yeah,
PayPal did it.
you
and-
create the account and then you share it, and people share it and they give and they share it and they give and they share it, and it just kind of bloomed from there. And we raised more than enough for the budget, and we start shooting in November. We got two. There are only two actors involved, female and male. The lead role of Lily is going to be played by a young lady named Emily Smith. She's from Dearborn. She's done television and film. A wonderful actress. And the part of Tom is being played by a newcomer. But his name is John Ailes. It's the first time he's ever done anything, but he had a great audition, and so we went with him.
Excellent.
Yeah. So it's new. It's a new adventure for quite a few people. We have a great crew. Combined, we have well over 100 years of experience in film and television. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully it doesn't turn into a bad film.
No. Sounds like you should have. So you're going to film it now, and then it will come out next year? Or is that how
Yeah, we'll film in November. We're filming in and around in Troy and in Waterford. We'll be shooting on the sound stages at MPI down in Troy, which is Michigan Production Institute or Film Institute or whatever MPI stands for. They got a great sound stage down there. That's also a film vocational school. So we'll be shooting there on the sound stage, and then we'll be shooting in and around Waterford. And we'll be in post-production probably through November and into December, and just in time for the 2019 Film Festival season, which we'll start putting it out there. And after it does its film festival tour, we'll see what happens with it. So.
Well, Well, thank you very much, and my pleasure. Thank you for coming out today.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Peace out.
It's time to stop. Hey, what's that sound?